If you're watching this video, you have probably grabbed something off the shelf at the grocery store, flipped it around, and looked at that nutrition label, whether it was to look at the total calories or the breakdown of the macros, or if there was sodium in it, or whatever the case was, ingredients also. And so I had a couple of clients, I sent a message to my clients group and I said, hey, give me some questions or some things that you'd like to see me cover in longer form stuff here on the YouTubes. I had like 3 people say that they wanted to see nutrition label stuff, how to best navigate those, etc. That's a great question. I think that's a really good topic. And I think for a lot of us, it's something that has been, whether it's confusing for you now or you've kind of figured it out, it is something that's been, challenging for some of us. I know it was for me when I first started looking at stuff. I was like, let's say 20 years ago, when I first started looking at nutrition labels, I was concerned about the fiber. I don't even know if we had added sugars back on there yet. I'll get into that and why that's important in a minute. But the very first thing that I want to cover here, and I know that for some of you, you're going to hear me say this, and the first thing that's going to pop into your mind is that that's unrealistic, extreme, or something like that, right? But just hear me out on this topic. So, the way that you can avoid having to read labels, worrying what your ingredients are in this food, blah, 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 all of this stuff that comes along with having to worry, air quote, worry about processed foods, is avoiding processed foods in the first place. Now, not only is that how you can ensure the foods that you are eating are what they actually are, and we'll get into why food labels are bullshit for a plethora of reasons in a minute, but if I make you, let's say, you come to my house for dinner and we have steak and we have a sweet potato and we have some sort of green vegetable, let's just say broccoli, right, for lack of a better term. The most processed thing that you might get on your table or get on the table or get served is I might hand you a Coke Zero or ask if you want, some sugar-free drink or whatever it is. You know what I mean? I'm not scared of artificial sweeteners, and that's another video for another day. But that may be the most processed thing that you consume if you were to come over to my house for dinner. And this is by no means saying that I don't consume processed foods, because I do. But probably 90% of what I consume are not processed foods. There are some things that I really like to add into my day with the understanding that I'm going to consume these foods in a very small percentage. There may be 1/3 of one meal. So if you think about that over the timeline of the week, let's say you have 3 meals a day and each one of those meals has 2 to 3 portions, whether it's a protein, fat, carbohydrate portion of the meal. My carbohydrate portion sometimes may be a processed thing. Like, I really like corn chips. And a lot of corn chips, it's really hard to find a corn chip that doesn't have some added oil to it. But it's really easy to find corn chips that don't have added sugar, that don't have a bunch of dyes and other nonsense that I don't necessarily want to consume. And I'm not saying that the added sugar is always going to be, air quote, a bad thing. But when I'm choosing foods, for me, most of the time, if you've seen any of my last videos, I don't have a great natural metabolic rate, which means I can't, for my size, I can't eat a ton of calories and stay lean. So I want to make sure that the foods I'm getting have a lot of volume. And the easiest way to do that is choosing single ingredient whole foods. The second part of that, and obviously the topic of this video, is that then you get to avoid having to read the labels and worrying about what's in your food at all. So now that I got that out of the way, and some of you guys think I'm crazy, or you're telling yourself, like, I can't avoid all these foods, whatever. Let me give you a little reframe before we move on there. If your immediate reaction to what I was saying about avoiding processed foods was, I can't, that's crazy, that's extreme, etc., and you're someone who's struggling to lose weight, take a step back, zoom out, right? And maybe ask yourself, is that part of it? Am I choosing too many processed foods? Because along with these processed foods, so when we say processed foods, we're not talking about chemicals and additives and all this other stuff, right, that TikTok and Instagram and Facebook scares us with. We're talking about taking multiple different food items and processing them together to make another food, right? And when we do that, a lot of times these food companies will have to add one of 2 things, because there's really only 2 things that give these foods extra flavor. And then we're not talking about the chemical additives like what's the MSG, right? Like, obviously that's a flavor enhancer, but what I'm talking about are fats and sugars. And so a lot of times we'll have a food, like, think about bread. You can make bread with very simple, there's a lot of you making a lot of sourdough right now. I see it all over Instagram. So you're making sourdough, right? You can make that item very easily. But if you go turn around a loaf of bread, just a regular, the cheapest loaf, I don't even know what a loaf of bread costs right now, but the cheapest loaf of bread you can absolutely buy, and you look down right underneath carbohydrate, it's going to say added sugar. And sometimes it's a lot of grams, 3, 4, 5 grams of added sugar per slice or 2 slices. Why do we need that? You don't need that to make the bread. They're putting the added sugar in there because it makes the bread more palatable. It tastes better, so you want to eat more of it. You choose that brand again. You know, think about the Hawaiian rolls or the Hawaii rolls, whatever in the orange packet that we all love to eat around Thanksgiving. Like, there's a reason that stuff tastes so good and so many of us love that bread, is because there's a lot of added sugar in those Hawaii rolls. It's not just, it came from Hawaii and it tastes great. You know what I mean? Like, it's probably made in Michigan and they just add a bunch of sugar to it. So keep in mind those sorts of things. But let's talk about divvying up the labels. A few things when we're reading food labels that I think is very important, at least for me. I can't speak for everyone, but it's very important for me. I like to make sure that if I'm consuming a processed food, that I have this mentality, one of 2 mentalities on food labeling or food products in general. Number 1, if I'm picking up something because I think it's a treat, or I want to have it as a treat meal or cheat meal or whatever you call it, whatever it is, your free day or whatever. I don't suggest you do free days either. Do free meals. It's real easy to eat like an asshole and eat way too many calories, especially if you're a smaller female. If you have a free or cheat or treat day, just have a treat meal, okay? So that's that. But if I'm picking up something like that, a lot of times it's going to be with the understanding that I'm picking up this thing or purchasing this thing to enjoy that food. And I'm not gonna freak out about necessarily what's on the label. I understand for the most part that this thing is going to be low volume food, really high calorie, right? Especially if there's added sugar, especially if there's a bunch of extra fat in this thing. So if you think about things like Pop-Tarts, like the only food that you can get gram for gram that's higher calorie than a Pop-Tart is like almond butter and or peanut butter. Almond butter is a great food option if you have the fat macros for it. Peanut butter is a less quality food option just from an inflammatory standpoint based on the peanut oil, but still not a terrible food. But most of the time, peanut butter is gonna have added palm oil, added sugar. And so again, we're turning up the calorie content, making this food that literally is just made out of ground up peanuts and salt, or it can be literally made, peanuts have natural sugar in them, ground up peanuts and salt into this food that now has added oil, added sugar, and it goes back to what we were saying a minute ago, so that it is more palatable, you consume more of it, it tastes better, and you like that. Don't get me wrong, I love me some Skippy, I love some Jif, I love some Peanut Pan peanut butter, but I consume that food understanding that I am taking on these extra calories, these extra macros, or however you look at your food, with the understanding that is happening. The second way I look at this, if I'm choosing processed food items with the understanding that I'm pulling this into my, when I say diet, my daily nutrition. So what I eat, not necessarily like, oh, I'm dieting, but my daily nutrition, right? My diet, I'm pulling that thing in. And so corn chips would be a prime example of that. So what I'll do is I'll turn this around and I'll look at how many grams of fat that particular product has. And the reason I'm doing that is because obviously with corn chips, let's say it's even, and most corn chips are gonna be like 3, 4, 5 ingredients max. If you go down the chip aisle, flip corn chips around. By and large, they're a healthier side processed food, but they're always gonna have some added oil. So the reason that I look at the grams of fat is because I will know if this product has more or less added oil in that particular product. And for me, that matters. The carbohydrate is pretty much gonna be the same. A lot of these, especially with chips, it's gonna be 28 grams or an ounce, and then they're gonna have pretty much the same amount of carbohydrate, 18 to 22 grams of carbohydrate, depending on the type of corn. Some corns have more sugar in them, some have less. But the grams of fat is what matters to me. And so when we're looking at food labels, I want to make sure that that makes sense to me. If I can turn 2 bags around and one has 230 calories per serving and the other one has 160 calories per serving, but they're the same product essentially, right? Let's just say corn chips. I'm going to go with the lower, and they're the same serving size, 28 grams or 1 ounce. They're the same serving size. I'm going to opt for the lower calorie option. And why is that? That's because that item likely has less oil in their processing process. Damn it, I didn't want to say process right after processing, but you get what I'm saying. So that is what I look for in the processed food labels. When we're talking about added sugar, I try to avoid almost anything that has added sugar. In my opinion, there's not a lot of things that I'm going to consume. Maybe if you're doing it for your kids, you want to look at those labels and just make sure that the added sugar is really low. You know, if you're trying to keep your kids eating as clean as possible, but hey, the kids like orange juice. You know, find an orange juice that has the least amount of added sugar. It's also going to have the least amount of calories. I know some of you are more averse to artificial sweeteners, but there are orange juices that don't have added sugar and instead will have something like stevia in them. And those are obviously going to be much lower calorie options. I personally don't know anyone who's ever gotten cancer, diabetes, or become obese from consuming artificial sweeteners. Not personally. I've been in this space for 20 plus years. I see blood work all the time. But I know a lot of people who have turned from drinking 2 liters of sugar sweetened sodas and juices, etc. per day, and turn to water and some Diet Coke every now and again, and now they're 10 times healthier, have great blood work, and live their lives a lot more. So again, that's another discussion for another day. But if you're looking at the added sugars for the kids, etc., you want to keep that on the low side. That's a way to do that. Protein. This is a good one to talk about. We see these bullshit labels from all of these companies, and they're constantly talking about good source of protein. It literally makes me, I won't say angry because it doesn't make me angry because I'll just kind of scoff at it and laugh, but it's unfortunate because so many people, even your doctors, have such little education surrounding nutrition that they can be easily fooled. And to me, that upsets me because I feel like people should not be profiting off of the ignorance of other people in a manipulative way. If you provide a service, like for example, I'm a nutrition consultant, that's what I do. I essentially educate people on nutrition. That's why we're having this conversation here. But I educate people on nutrition so that they can improve the quality of their lives, whether that's weight loss, muscle gain, feeling better, getting rid of some ailments that they don't want to go that medical route with. I help people do that. And so I feel like that is a very ethical way to make a living while also improving the quality of life for someone else. Whereas if I was, I don't know, selling whatever, something that hurts someone and then telling them, no, this is great, you know, that's what I see when I see a can of nuts, right? Whether it's pistachios or almonds or whatever. Again, not that the foods are bad, but they'll say great source of protein. And then a serving has 260 calories with only 8 grams of protein. So let me give you a great tip here. I made a video on this on Instagram. If you're not following me on Instagram, do that. It's at the.coach.phil. It'll probably be right here. So follow that. Here's how an easy way to do this. So let's say something has 200 calories as for one serving has 200 calories. What I want you to do is remove the last 0 from that. So you're gonna be left with 20, right? So 200 minus the 0, take the 0 off the end, you're gonna have 20 left. If you go down on the label and it doesn't have more, or at least rather, 20 grams, so 20, 21, 22, etc., grams of protein, in my opinion, that thing is not a great source of protein. I made this post on Instagram the other day, and then someone said like, well, that leaves us with like next to no options. And the first thing that came in my brain is like, so yeah, basically every lean meat, tuna, shrimp, scallops, lobster, every white fish, like those are all shellfish, but every white fish, egg whites, every lunch meat you can think of. So I didn't even respond to the guy, but if the things that I'm talking about, you probably have 100 plus options. So what I'm trying to get people to understand though is if you see something and it says good source of protein and the serving size is, or the serving calories per serving are 180 calories, but that thing has 6 grams of protein, like a piece of bread, like Dave's Killer Bread. People would come to me all the time. I would get new clients and I'd see they're having 6 pieces of Dave's Killer Bread a day. And I'm like, why are they consuming all of their carbs in Dave's Killer Bread? And I'm like, oh, because they think it's a high protein source because maybe it has 6 or 8 grams. I can't remember which one. But again, not a good protein source. And by the way, Dave's Killer Breads, and no hate on them, like it is what it is. Don't sue me, Dave's Killer Bread. That good source of protein actually just comes from the added wheat gluten. They're adding more gluten to that process, and they're processing to that food to say that it has more protein. Not a good source of protein, something to avoid, especially if you're someone who's like, oh, I have the bubble guts every time I have Dave's Killer Bread peanut butter and jelly sandwich. If you're having Dave's Killer Bread peanut butter and jelly sandwiches as part of your daily nutrition and you can't lose weight, air quote, can't lose weight, and you don't feel so great all the time, maybe let's opt for some whole food choices instead. So I hope this video provided some value to you. Again, I'm looking for you guys. If you're watching this stuff, if you watched all the way to this point, drop a comment below and let me hear, or know rather, something you would like to hear me cover. Whether it's nutrition related, whether it's fitness related. I don't always talk about the fitness stuff, but like you'll probably see a burpee video or one I just posted not too long ago. Go check that out. Peptide related stuff. So yeah, drop those in the comments. Let me know if you have any questions. If you found some value here, I hope this clears up food labels, or at least this is how I approach food labels. And I hope this helps for you and your family. Later.